My name is Anya Petrova, and I'm 22 years old. I live in the vibrant, chaotic, and utterly captivating city of Moscow. I've always been a bit of a romantic, dreaming of grand love stories and fairy tale endings. Maybe it's because I grew up devouring Russian literature, where passion and drama are as commonplace as snow in winter. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which allows me the freedom to fuel my other passion, exploring the hidden corners of Moscow, sketching its architectural wonders, and soaking in the atmosphere of its bustling streets. I live in a small, cozy apartment in the Arbet district, crammed with art supplies, books, and an ever-growing collection of vintage teacups. It's my sanctuary, my creative haven. My life was comfortable, predictable, maybe even a little boring. I had a close circle of friends, a job I enjoyed, and enough independence to satisfy my adventurous spirit. But something was missing. That grand love story I'd always dreamed of. I yearned for a connection that went beyond friendship, a soulmate who understood my quirky passions and shared my love for all things beautiful. So, when I decided to enroll in a night class on advanced calligraphy, it wasn't just to improve my design skills. It was also a subtle, hopeful attempt to expand my horizons and maybe, just maybe, stumble upon a love story of my own. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent decision would plunge me into a whirlwind of deception, heartbreak, and ultimately, a burning desire for revenge. The calligraphy class was held in an old, charming building near the university. The room was filled with the scent of ink and paper, a comforting aroma that immediately put me at ease. Our instructor, a wizened old woman named Madame Olga, possessed a wisdom that seemed to radiate from her very being. I was immediately drawn to the intricate strokes and elegant curves of the Cyrillic alphabet, losing myself in the art of creating beautiful letters. And then there was Dmitri. He sat across from me, his brow furrowed in concentration as he meticulously practiced his strokes. He was tall, with dark, brooding eyes and a quiet intensity that both intrigued and intimidated me. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We started talking during breaks, sharing our thoughts on art, literature, and life in general. I was captivated. He was so intelligent, so sensitive, so unlike anyone I had ever met before. He listened intently when I spoke, his eyes sparkling with genuine interest. He seemed to understand me on a level that no one else ever had. He even enjoyed the same obscure films and music that I did. It felt like fate. As the weeks passed, Dmitri and I grew closer. We began meeting outside of class, exploring hidden cafes, wandering through art galleries, and sharing our dreams and aspirations. I found myself falling head over heels for him. He was everything I had ever wanted. He was everything I thought I wanted. He was kind, considerate, and incredibly romantic. He would bring me flowers, write me poems, and take me to candlelit dinners. I felt like I was living in a dream. He told me stories of his childhood, his family, his hopes for the future. He seemed so open, so honest. I confided in him about my own insecurities, my fears, and my deepest desires. He listened with unwavering attention, offering words of comfort and support. I truly believed that I had found my soulmate. I was so happy, so completely and utterly happy. I let myself believe in the fairy tale, in the grand love story that I had always dreamed of. Dmitri was my prince and I was his princess, or so I thought. One evening, after a particularly romantic date, Dmitri walked me back to my apartment. As we stood at my doorstep, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights, he confessed his love for me. My heart soared. I had been waiting for this moment, yearning for those words. I told him that I loved him too, my voice trembling with emotion. He leaned in and kissed me, a kiss that sent shivers down my spine. It was the most perfect moment of my life, or so I thought. As the days turned into weeks, our relationship deepened. We spent every moment together, exploring the city, cooking meals, and simply enjoying each other's company. I was completely and utterly devoted to him. He was my world, my everything. I even started picturing our future together, a future filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. We talked about moving in together, traveling the world, and even starting a family. I was so blinded by love that I failed to see the cracks in the facade, the subtle inconsistencies in his stories, the fleeting moments of hesitation in his eyes. I was too caught up in the fairy tale to notice that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. Then, one fateful afternoon, everything came crashing down. I decided to surprise Dmitri at his apartment. He had told me he was working on a project, and I wanted to bring him lunch and offer my support. I knew where he lived. He had given me the address many weeks ago, so there was no reason for him to be surprised at my showing up. I let myself in with the spare key he had given me, my heart filled with anticipation. But what I found inside shattered my world into a million pieces. The apartment was a mess, clothes scattered everywhere, empty bottles littering the floor. But that wasn't the shocking part. In the bedroom, rummaging through the closet, stood Dmitri. Except it wasn't Dmitri. It was a woman, a beautiful woman with long, flowing hair and striking features. A woman who looked exactly like Dmitri, only different. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Was this a dream? A hallucination? I must be losing my mind. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to move. The woman turned around, her eyes widening in surprise. She stared at me for a moment, a look of panic flashing across her face. Then she spoke, her voice a low, husky whisper. "Anya, what are you doing here?" It was Dmitri's voice, but it was also a woman's voice. It was then that I noticed the makeup, the wig, the carefully constructed facade. The truth hit me like a tidal wave, washing away all the love, the trust, the dreams that I had so carefully built. Dmitri wasn't Dmitri at all. Dmitri was a woman pretending to be a man. My head spun, my stomach churned. I felt like I was going to be sick. I didn't know what to say or do. I felt like I was going to faint. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with shame and regret. Then she sighed and said, "My name is Dasha, and I'm sorry." My world tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in was a lie. Dasha, or rather Dmitri, proceeded to explain everything. She was a trans woman who had been living as a man for years, afraid to reveal her true identity to the world. She had created the persona of Dmitri to escape the judgment and discrimination she feared she would face if she lived openly as a woman. She had enrolled in the calligraphy class as a way to explore her artistic side, a side she had suppressed for so long. And then she met me. She claimed that she had fallen in love with me, that she had never felt such a strong connection with anyone before. She knew that what she was doing was wrong, that she was living a lie, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. She was afraid of losing me, of shattering the illusion that had brought her so much happiness. She begged for my forgiveness, tears streaming down her face. She swore that her feelings for me were real, that she truly loved me. I listened in stunned silence, my mind struggling to process the information. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the remnants of the love I had felt for Dmitri. But another part of me was filled with rage, betrayal, and a profound sense of violation. I had been deceived, manipulated, and lied to. The man I had fallen in love with didn't exist. He was a figment of Dash's imagination, a carefully constructed illusion that had ensnared my heart. I felt like a fool, a naive, gullible fool who had been played for a sucker. How could I have been so blind? How could I have not seen the truth? The pain was unbearable, a searing agony that ripped through my soul. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to destroy everything in my path, but I couldn't. I was too numb, too shocked, too heartbroken. I simply turned around and walked out of the apartment, leaving Dasha standing there, her tears falling on deaf ears. I didn't say a word. I just walked away, my heart shattered into a million pieces. As I walked back to my apartment, the city seemed different, colder, more hostile. The streets that had once been filled with romance and possibility now felt like a labyrinth of deceit and betrayal. The cafes where Dmitri and I had shared intimate conversations now seemed like empty, hollow shells. Everything was tainted, corrupted by the lie that had consumed my life. I felt like I was walking through a nightmare, a twisted version of the fairy tale I had always dreamed of. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, and fell onto my bed, sobbing uncontrollably. The tears flowed for hours, washing away the remnants of my shattered dreams. I cried for Dmitri, for the love that I had lost, for the future that would never be. I cried for myself, for the pain and humiliation that I had endured. And as the tears finally subsided, a new emotion began to simmer beneath the surface, a burning desire for revenge. I had been wronged, deeply and profoundly wronged, and I wasn't going to let Dasha get away with it. She had played with my emotions, manipulated my heart, and shattered my trust. Now it was my turn to play, my turn to manipulate, my turn to shatter. But what could I do? How could I possibly get revenge on someone who had already caused me so much pain? The answer, I realized, lay in the very thing that had brought us together, the calligraphy class. The calligraphy class was more than just a hobby for Dasha. It was a refuge, a place where she could express her true self, even if it was under the guise of Dmitri. It was a place where she felt safe, accepted, and valued. And that, I realized, was her weakness. I decided to use the class as a stage for my revenge. I would expose her, reveal her true identity to everyone, and shatter the illusion that she had so carefully constructed. I knew it was a cruel plan, but I didn't care. I was consumed by a need for retribution, a desire to inflict the same pain on her that she had inflicted on me. The next day, I went to the calligraphy class, my heart pounding with anticipation and a hint of trepidation. I had barely slept the night before, my mind racing with plans and scenarios. I was determined to carry out my revenge, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a line, that I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. As I entered the classroom, I saw Dasha sitting in her usual spot, her head bent over her work. She looked tired, her eyes red and puffy. She glanced up as I approached, her face etched with a mixture of hope and fear. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret that haunted her. For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. Maybe I should just let it go, walk away, and try to move on with my life. But the thought of her getting away with what she had done reignited my anger, fueling my determination. I took a deep breath and walked towards her, my eyes fixed on hers. "Dmitri," I said, my voice cold and hard. She flinched at the sound of her alias, her eyes widening in alarm. "Anya, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" "We're talking now," I said, my voice rising. "I want everyone to know the truth about you." She looked around the room, her eyes darting from face to face. The other students were watching us, their curiosity piqued by our tense exchange. "Please, Anya, don't do this," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. "I'll do anything, just don't tell them." "It's too late, Dasha," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "The truth will be revealed." I turned to the rest of the class, my voice clear and strong. "Everyone, I have something to tell you about Dmitri, something that you all need to know." Dasha lunged at me, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me away. "Stop it, Anya, please, just stop it." I shook her off, my eyes blazing with anger. "Get away from me, you liar." I stepped back and took a deep breath, preparing to unleash my carefully crafted plan of revenge. But then something unexpected happened. Madame Olga, our wise and perceptive instructor, stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Anya, please," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I know you're hurting, but this is not the way." I turned to her, my anger momentarily subdued by her calm demeanor. "But Madame Olga, she lied to me, she deceived me, she deserves to be exposed." Madame Olga sighed and shook her head. "I know, child, I know, but revenge will not heal your pain, it will only create more suffering." She looked at Dasha, her eyes filled with compassion. "Dasha, is it true? Is what Anya says true?" Dasha hung her head, her shoulders slumped with defeat. "Yes, Madame Olga," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's true." A collective gasp filled the room as the other students absorbed the revelation. Some looked shocked, some looked confused, and some looked sympathetic. Madame Olga turned back to me, her eyes pleading. "Anya, please let her explain. Let her tell her story. And then if you still feel the need for revenge, you can do what you must." I hesitated for a moment, torn between my desire for retribution and the wisdom of Madame Olga's words. I looked at Dasha, her face etched with shame and regret. I saw the pain in her eyes, the fear that haunted her. And for the first time, I began to see her not as a monster, but as a human being. A flawed, vulnerable human being who had made a mistake. A terrible mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. I took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She can explain." Dasha looked up, her eyes filled with gratitude. She took a step forward and faced the class, her voice trembling as she began to speak. She told her story, the story of her struggle with her gender identity, the story of her fear and isolation, the story of her decision to live as a man. She explained that she had never intended to hurt me, that she had truly fallen in love with me, but that she had been too afraid to reveal her true self. She apologized for her deception, for the pain she had caused me, for the lies she had told. She begged for our forgiveness, her voice choked with emotion. As she spoke, I began to understand her, to empathize with her struggle. I realized that she wasn't a villain, but a victim of her own circumstances. She had been trapped in a prison of her own making, a prison built on fear and insecurity. And I, in my desire for revenge, had been about to become her jailer. When she finished speaking, the room was silent. The other students were looking at her with a mixture of pity and understanding. Madame Olga stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on Dasha's shoulder. "Thank you, Dasha," she said, her voice gentle. Thank you for your honesty. It takes great courage to reveal such a personal truth. She turned to the class and said, We all make mistakes. We all have secrets. But it is how we deal with those mistakes and secrets that defines us. Let us not judge Dasha for her past, but let us support her in her journey to become her true self. The other students nodded in agreement, their faces filled with compassion. One by one, they approached Dasha and offered her words of support and encouragement. Some even hugged her, their gestures filled with warmth and acceptance. I watched in amazement as Dasha was embraced by the community that she had feared would reject her. I realized that my plan for revenge had been misguided, that it would have only caused more pain and suffering. I had been so focused on my own hurt that I had failed to see the bigger picture, the humanity that lay beneath the surface. I took a deep breath and walked towards Dasha, my heart filled with a mix of emotions. Dasha, I said, my voice soft. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with trepidation. I'm not going to lie, I'm still hurt, I'm still angry, but I understand, and I forgive you. A look of relief washed over her face, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you, Anya, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you for your understanding, thank you for your forgiveness. I smiled sadly and shook my head. Don't thank me, I almost destroyed you. I almost became the very thing I hated. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, our eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. Then I did something that surprised both of us. I hugged her. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight, feeling the weight of her pain and the sincerity of her remorse. She hugged me back, her tears soaking my shirt. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, offering comfort and support. In that moment, I realized that revenge wasn't the answer. Forgiveness was. Forgiving Dasha, not just for her sake, but for my own. Letting go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me, and opening my heart to compassion and understanding. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It was the only way to heal, to move on, to find peace. In the end, I didn't get revenge on Dasha. Instead, I found something far more valuable: forgiveness, understanding, and a newfound appreciation for the complexities of human nature. I learned that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even the deepest betrayals can be overcome with compassion and empathy. Dasha and I remained friends, supporting each other through our individual journeys. She eventually transitioned and began living openly as a woman, finding happiness and acceptance in her true identity. I moved on with my life, finding love again with someone who cherished and respected me for who I am. And although the pain of the betrayal lingered for a while, it eventually faded, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the lessons I had learned. The calligraphy class became a symbol of our transformation, a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the resilience of the human spirit. It wasn't the fairy tale love story I had always dreamed of, but it was a story nonetheless. A story of deception, heartbreak, and ultimately, redemption. And as I look back on that chapter of my life, I realize that it was a necessary part of my journey, a painful but valuable lesson that helped me become the person I am today. But what if Dasha's deception was far from over? Life moved on, and I found a comfortable rhythm. I continued with my graphic design, my art, and my exploration of Moscow. Dasha and I stayed in touch, supporting each other as friends. I even started dating again, cautiously optimistic but also a little guarded. I met a kind and genuine man named Alexei, an architect with a passion for restoring old buildings. He was everything Dmitri wasn't: honest, open, and unapologetically himself. We connected on a deep level, and I found myself falling in love again, this time with a sense of trust and security that I had never experienced before. But just when I thought I had finally closed the book on the Dasha chapter of my life, a new twist emerged, one that threatened to unravel everything I had worked so hard to build. One evening, I received a message from Dasha. She asked if we could meet, saying that she had something important to tell me. I hesitated. I had no desire to rehash the past, but I also felt a sense of obligation to her. We had been through so much together, and I couldn't just ignore her plea. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, a place we had frequented during our calligraphy days. The atmosphere was nostalgic, but also tinged with a sense of unease. Dasha looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room. She fidgeted with her teacup, avoiding eye contact. "What's wrong, Dasha?" I asked, my voice gentle. She took a deep breath and finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. "Anya, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's about Dmitri." My heart sank. I had hoped that we were done with that chapter of our lives, but it seemed that the past was determined to haunt me. "What about Dmitri?" I asked, my voice strained. She hesitated for a moment, then blurted out, "Dmitri, he's not who you think he is." I stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about? Dmitri was you were pretending to be a man." Dasha shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "No, Anya, you don't understand. Dmitri was a real person. I created him based on someone I knew." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. It was too much, too confusing. "Who was he?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who was the real Dmitri?" Dasha took another deep breath and said, "His name was Dmitri Volkov, and he was my brother." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Dmitri was Dasha's brother. How was that even possible? I struggled to process the information, my mind racing to make sense of it all. "But you said you created Dmitri to escape judgment," I stammered. "You said you were afraid to live openly as a woman." Dasha nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "That's true, but it's not the whole story. I did want to live as a woman, but I was also terrified of losing my family, especially Dmitri. We were incredibly close. He was my protector, my confidant, my best friend. He was everything to me. But Dmitri, he was sick. He had a rare genetic disorder that was slowly killing him." She paused, her voice choked with emotion. "He didn't have much time left, and he was terrified of dying. He didn't want to be forgotten." That's when the pieces started to fall into place. Dasha had created the persona of Dmitri not just for herself, but also for her dying brother. It was a way to keep his memory alive, to give him a second chance at life, even if it was through her. "So, you pretended to be him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dasha nodded, her eyes filled with pain. "Yes, I studied his mannerisms, his voice, his interests. I even wore his clothes. I wanted to be him, to embody him, to keep him alive." But why the calligraphy class? Why did she choose to pursue a relationship with me under the guise of Dmitri? Dasha explained that Dmitri had always been fascinated by calligraphy, but he had never had the chance to pursue it. So, when she created the persona of Dmitri, she decided to enroll in the class in his honor. As for the relationship with me, she claimed that it was never part of the plan. She had simply been drawn to me, captivated by my kindness, my passion, and my artistic spirit. She had fallen in love with me, just like she said before, but this time it was even more complicated. She was falling in love as a woman pretending to be her dying brother. "I know it was wrong, Anya," she said, her voice pleading. "I know I hurt you, but I swear my feelings for you were real. I didn't know how to stop. I was so afraid of losing you, of losing Dmitri all over again." I stared at her, my mind overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the situation. It was a web of lies, deception, and grief, all intertwined in a way that was almost impossible to untangle. I felt a surge of anger, betrayal, and confusion, but I also felt a flicker of sympathy for Dasha, for the impossible burden she had been carrying. "So, what happened to Dmitri?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Dasha took a deep breath and said, "He died a few months after we met. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family. He knew what I was doing, and he approved. He was happy that I was keeping his memory alive." The revelation of Dmitri's existence and his relationship to Dasha cast a new light on everything that had happened between us. It was no longer just a simple case of deception. It was a complex tapestry of grief, love, and identity. I struggled to reconcile the image of Dasha as a manipulative liar with the image of her as a grieving sister trying to honor her dying brother. It was all so convoluted, so emotionally charged. I needed time to process it all, to sort through my feelings and decide what to do next. I excused myself from the cafe, telling Dasha that I needed to think. I walked aimlessly through the streets of Moscow, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. I felt angry at Dasha for deceiving me, for dragging me into her twisted world. But I also felt a strange sense of compassion for her, for the pain and loss she had endured. I thought about Dmitri, the real Dmitri, the brother who had inspired the persona that had captivated my heart. I wondered what he would have thought of all this, of the lies and the heartbreak that had resulted from his sister's actions. As I walked, I realized that I couldn't stay angry forever. I couldn't let the past consume me. I needed to find a way to move forward, to heal, and to reclaim my life. But how could I do that when the truth was so distorted, so entangled with lies and deception? I decided to seek advice from Madame Olga, our calligraphy instructor. She had always been a source of wisdom and guidance, and I trusted her to help me navigate this difficult situation. I found her in her studio, surrounded by her calligraphy tools and her calming presence. I told her everything, from the initial deception to the latest revelation about Dmitri. She listened patiently, her eyes filled with compassion. When I finished, she took my hand and said, "Anya, my dear, life is never simple. It is a complex tapestry of joy and sorrow, truth and lies, love and loss. You have been through a great deal, but you are strong. You will find a way to heal." I asked her what she thought I should do. Should I forgive Dasha? Should I confront her? Should I simply walk away and try to forget everything? Madame Olga smiled gently and said, "That is a decision that only you can make. But I will tell you this. Forgiveness is not about condoning the actions of others. It is about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It is about choosing peace over conflict." Her words resonated with me. I knew that she was right. Holding on to anger would only hurt me in the long run. But how could I forgive Dasha when she had lied to me so many times? How could I trust her when she had already shattered my heart? Madame Olga sensed my hesitation and said, "Trust is not something that is given freely. It is something that is earned. Dasha has broken your trust, but she can earn it back. It will take time, patience, and honesty, but it is possible." She advised me to confront Dasha, to ask her all the questions that I had, and to listen to her answers with an open mind. She also warned me to be prepared for the possibility that Dasha might still be hiding something. "The truth," she said, "is often buried beneath layers of deception, and it takes courage and perseverance to uncover it." With Madame Olga's advice in mind, I decided to confront Dasha and demand the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way to move forward and find peace. As I prepared for the confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, some piece of the puzzle that I hadn't yet found. What if Dmitri wasn't just Dasha's brother? What if he played a more active role in the deception than she had revealed? The thought lingered in my mind, casting a shadow of doubt over everything I thought I knew. Armed with Madame Olga's wisdom and a burning desire for the truth, I arranged to meet with Dasha again. This time, I chose a neutral location, a park in the city center, far away from the memories and emotions of our past. I arrived early, my heart pounding with anticipation and a sense of trepidation. I watched as Dasha approached, her face etched with anxiety and a hint of hope. She sat down on the bench beside me, her eyes avoiding mine. "Thank you for meeting me, Anya," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve it." I took a deep breath and said, "Dasha, I need you to be honest with me. I need you to tell me the whole truth, no matter how painful it may be." She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "I will, Anya, I promise. I owe you that much." I started with the most pressing question, the one that had been haunting me since our last conversation. "Tell me about Dmitri," I said, my voice firm. "Tell me everything. What was he like? What was your relationship like? And what role did he play in all of this?" Dasha hesitated for a moment, then began to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. She described Dmitri as a kind, gentle, and artistic soul. He had always been her protector, her confidant, and her best friend. They had shared a deep bond, a connection that transcended the ordinary sibling relationship. She explained that Dmitri had been diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder at a young age, a disease that slowly robbed him of his strength and vitality. He had spent much of his life confined to his home, unable to experience the world in the way that he longed to. When Dasha decided to live as a man, Dmitri had been her biggest supporter. He had helped her create the persona of Dmitri, offering advice on mannerisms, voice, and even clothing. He had seen it as a way to vicariously experience the world through her, to live out his dreams through her actions. But as Dmitri's condition worsened, he became increasingly despondent. He was terrified of dying, of being forgotten, of leaving Dasha alone in the world. That's when they came up with the idea of Dasha enrolling in the calligraphy class as Dmitri. It was a way to keep his memory alive, to give him a second chance at life, even if it was through her. But Dasha insisted that Dmitri had never intended for her to pursue a romantic relationship with me. It was an unforeseen consequence of their plan, a twist of fate that had spiraled out of control. I listened intently, my mind trying to piece together the puzzle. I asked her about the inconsistencies in her stories, the moments of hesitation in her eyes, the subtle clues that I had missed along the way. She explained that she had been terrified of being discovered, of shattering the illusion that had brought so much comfort to both her and Dmitri. She had lied to protect herself, to protect her brother's memory, and to protect the fragile connection that she had forged with me. As she spoke, I began to see a different side of Dasha, a side that I had never seen before. I saw her vulnerability, her pain, and her unwavering love for her brother. I realized that she had been trapped in an impossible situation, torn between her desire to honor her brother's memory and her desire to be true to herself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, some piece of the puzzle that she wasn't telling me. I decided to confront her with my suspicions, to ask her the question that had been nagging at me since our last conversation. "Dasha," I said, my voice firm, "was Dmitri really just your brother, or was he something more?" She looked at me, her eyes widening in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I mean," I said, "were you and Dmitri lovers?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dasha's face paled, her eyes darting around nervously. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I stared at her, my heart pounding with anticipation and a sense of dread. Had I finally uncovered the truth? Or was I simply imagining things, letting my suspicions run wild? After what seemed like an eternity, Dasha finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. How did you know?" The confirmation hit me like a tidal wave, washing away any remaining doubts. Dasha and Dmitri had been more than just siblings, they had been lovers. Incest. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. It was a taboo, a violation of the most fundamental social norms. But it also explained so much, the intensity of their bond, the depth of their connection, and the lengths to which they were willing to go to protect each other. I struggled to process the information, my mind reeling with shock and disgust. How could I have been so blind? How could I have fallen in love with someone who was entangled in such a twisted relationship? I took a deep breath and said, "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you tell me the truth. Tell me everything. How did it start? How long did it last? And what role did it play in all of this?" Dasha hung her head, her shoulders slumped with defeat. She began to speak, her voice filled with shame and regret. She explained that their relationship had started innocently enough, as a close bond between siblings. But as they grew older, their feelings for each other had evolved into something more, something forbidden. They had tried to suppress their desires, to deny their feelings, but they had been unable to resist the pull that drew them together. Their relationship had remained a secret, hidden from the world, a source of both intense pleasure and profound guilt. When Dmitri was diagnosed with his illness, their bond had only deepened. They had clung to each other, seeking solace and comfort in the face of impending death. It was during this time that they had come up with the idea of Dasha living as Dmitri, as a way to keep their love alive, even after Dmitri was gone. Dasha insisted that their relationship had never been about exploitation or abuse. It had been about love, pure and simple, a love that defied social norms and challenged conventional morality. But she also acknowledged that it had been wrong, that it had caused pain and suffering to others, including me. As she spoke, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disgust, pity, and even a strange sense of understanding. I realized that their relationship had been a product of their unique circumstances, a desperate attempt to find love and connection in a world that had denied them both. But that didn't excuse their actions. They had still lied to me, manipulated me, and dragged me into their twisted world. I took a deep breath and said, "Dasha, I don't know what to say. I'm disgusted, I'm hurt, and I'm confused. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with tears. "I understand, Anya. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth, the whole truth." I stood up, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. "I need to go," I said, my voice barely audible. "I need to think about all of this." I turned and walked away, leaving Dasha sitting alone on the bench, her tears falling silently on the ground. As I walked, I realized that the truth was far more complex and disturbing than I had ever imagined. The lies, the deception, and the forbidden love had created a web of pain and suffering that had ensnared us all. And I was left to pick up the pieces, to decide what to do with the shattered remains of my heart and my trust. But could there be even more secrets to uncover? Days turned into weeks, and I remained lost in a sea of confusion and conflicting emotions. The revelation about Dasha and Dmitri's incestuous relationship had shaken me to my core. I couldn't reconcile the image of Dasha as a grieving sister with the image of her as a forbidden lover. It was all too much, too twisted, too disturbing. I withdrew from my friends and family, isolating myself in my apartment. I couldn't bring myself to work, to paint, or even to leave the house. I spent my days replaying the events of the past few months, searching for answers, for explanations, for some way to make sense of it all. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop the thoughts from racing through my mind. Was anything Dasha had told me true? Was Dmitri really dead? Or was he still alive, hiding somewhere, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? The questions haunted me, driving me to the brink of madness. I knew that I needed to find closure, to put an end to this nightmare, but I didn't know how. I considered going to the police, but what would I say? That I had been deceived by a trans woman pretending to be her dead brother, with whom she had an incestuous relationship. It sounded like a plot from a bad soap opera, not a credible crime. And even if the police did believe me, what could they do? Dasha hadn't technically broken any laws, other than perhaps some minor fraud charges related to her use of Dmitri's identity. No, the police weren't the answer. I needed to find the truth myself, to uncover the remaining secrets, and to finally put this nightmare to rest. I decided to revisit Dmitri's grave. Dasha had told me where he was buried, and I had visited the grave once before, shortly after his supposed death. But this time, I would go with a different purpose, a different mindset. I would examine the grave closely, searching for clues, for inconsistencies, for anything that might suggest that Dmitri was still alive. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. I couldn't let Dasha's lies continue to control my life. I took a taxi to the cemetery, a sprawling expanse of land on the outskirts of Moscow. The air was cold and damp, and a light mist hung over the tombstones, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. I walked through the rows of graves, searching for Dmitri's name. It didn't take long to find it, a simple stone marker with his name, date of birth, and date of death engraved on the surface. I knelt down beside the grave and examined it closely. The stone was clean and well-maintained, suggesting that someone had been visiting it regularly. There were fresh flowers in a vase beside the grave, a bouquet of lilies and roses, Dmitri's favorite flowers, according to Dasha. I ran my fingers over the inscription, feeling the cold, smooth surface of the stone. Everything seemed to be in order, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A small, almost imperceptible scratch on the edge of the stone, near the date of death. It was so faint that I almost missed it, but it was there. I examined it more closely, using my fingernail to trace the outline of the scratch. It was a small, deliberate mark, as if someone had tried to erase or alter the inscription. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense that I was finally on the verge of uncovering the truth. What was Dasha trying to hide? What was the significance of the scratch on Dmitri's grave? I decided to investigate further, to dig deeper, to uncover the secrets that were buried beneath the surface. I knew that I was taking a risk, that I was venturing into dangerous territory. But I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far, invested too much. I had to know the truth, no matter what the cost. I returned to my apartment, my mind racing with possibilities. The scratch on Dmitri's grave was a clear sign that something was amiss. But what did it mean? Was Dasha trying to alter the date of death? Was she trying to erase Dmitri's name altogether? Or was the scratch simply a coincidence, a random mark that had nothing to do with the deception? I couldn't rule out any possibility. I needed more information, more evidence. I decided to consult with a friend of mine, a former police officer named Sergei. Sergei was a gruff, no-nonsense kind of guy, but he was also incredibly intelligent and resourceful. He had a knack for solving puzzles, for uncovering hidden truths. I had helped him out with some graphic design work in the past, and I knew that he would be willing to help me now. I called Sergei and explained the situation, telling him about Dasha, Dmitri, and the scratch on the grave. He listened patiently, his voice betraying no emotion. When I finished, he said, "Meet me at my office tomorrow morning. I'll see what I can do." I arrived at Sergei's office the next morning, feeling a mixture of hope and anxiety. His office was a small, cluttered space, filled with files, photographs, and various pieces of police memorabilia. Sergei greeted me with a nod and motioned for me to sit down. "I've done some digging," he said, his voice low and serious. "I've checked the records, and there's no record of a Dmitri Volkov dying in Moscow on the date that's engraved on the tombstone." My heart skipped a beat. This was it, the confirmation I had been waiting for. Dmitri was still alive. What does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Sergei shrugged. It could mean a lot of things. It could mean that Dmitri Volkov never existed. It could mean that he died somewhere else under a different name. Or it could mean that he's still alive and Dasha is trying to cover up his existence. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. Dasha had lied to me again, manipulated me again. How could I have been so stupid, so gullible? Sergei continued. I also checked the records for Dasha Volkov. There's no record of her undergoing gender reassignment surgery. That doesn't necessarily mean she didn't have the surgery, but it does suggest that she's been living a lie for a long time. So, what do we do? I asked, my voice filled with desperation. Sergei thought for a moment, then said, We need to find Dmitry Volkov. If he's alive, he's the key to unlocking the truth. I have some contacts in the underworld, people who might know where he is. It's a long shot, but it's worth a try. He spent the next few days making calls, pulling strings, and gathering information. I waited anxiously, my nerves frayed, my mind consumed by thoughts of Dasha and Dmitry. Finally, Sergei called me and said, I have something, meet me at my office. I rushed to Sergei's office, my heart pounding with anticipation. He greeted me with a grim expression. I found him, he said, his voice low. Dmitry Volkov is alive. He's living in a small village outside of Moscow under an assumed name. I felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over me. I had been right all along. Dasha had been lying to me, manipulating me, and protecting her forbidden love. Where is he? I asked, my voice trembling. Sergei hesitated for a moment, then said, I'm not sure you want to know. I looked at Sergei, my eyes filled with confusion. What do you mean? Of course, I want to know. I need to confront him to get the truth, to finally put an end to this nightmare. Sergei sighed and said, Anya, Dmitry Volkov is not the man you think he is. He's a dangerous man, a criminal. He's wanted for fraud, extortion, and even murder. My heart sank. This couldn't be true. Dmitry, the kind, gentle, and artistic soul that Dasha had described, a criminal. It was too much, too unbelievable. You must be mistaken, I said, my voice shaking. There must be some mistake. Sergei shook his head. I'm afraid not, Anya. I've seen the evidence. Dmitry Volkov is a monster. He explained that Dmitry had been involved in a series of illegal activities for years, using his charm and intelligence to manipulate and exploit others. He had defrauded investors, extorted businesses, and even ordered the murder of a rival gang member. Dasha had known about Dmitry's criminal activities, but she had turned a blind eye, blinded by her love for him. She had even helped him cover up his crimes, using her artistic skills to forge documents and create false identities. The calligraphy class had been a way for Dasha to earn money to support Dmitry, to help him evade the authorities. The deception, the lies, and the manipulation had all been part of a larger scheme, a twisted game that had been orchestrated by Dmitry and played out by Dasha. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had been so focused on Dasha's lies that I had failed to see the bigger picture, the dark and sinister truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. Dmitry wasn't just a dying brother or a forbidden lover. He was a criminal mastermind, a puppeteer pulling the strings of Dasha's life. And I had been a pawn in their game, a naive and gullible fool who had been used and manipulated for their own purposes. What do we do now? I asked, my voice filled with despair. Sergei thought for a moment, then said, We need to go to the police. We need to expose Dmitry Volkov and bring him to justice. It won't be easy, but it's the right thing to do. I hesitated. Going to the police would mean exposing Dasha, revealing her lies and her complicity in Dmitry's crimes. It would mean destroying her life, ruining her future. But could I really protect her, knowing what she had done, knowing the extent of her deception? I thought about the pain and suffering that Dmitry had caused, the lives he had ruined, the crimes he had committed. I thought about the innocent people who had been defrauded, extorted, and murdered by his hand. I realized that I couldn't protect Dasha, not anymore. She had made her choice, and she had to face the consequences. I took a deep breath and said, Okay, let's go to the police. Sergei and I went to the police and presented our evidence. The police were skeptical at first, but after Sergei vouched for my credibility, they agreed to investigate. They launched a full-scale investigation into Dmitry Volkov, his criminal activities, and Dasha's role in the deception. They interviewed witnesses, examined documents, and gathered evidence. It didn't take long for them to uncover the truth. Dmitry Volkov was a wanted man, a dangerous criminal who had been hiding from the authorities for years. Dasha Volkov was his accomplice, his lover, and his protector. The police raided the village where Dmitry was hiding and arrested him without incident. He didn't resist, didn't deny his identity, and didn't show any remorse for his crimes. He simply smiled and said, It's over. Dasha was also arrested and charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. She pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Dmitri was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The truth had finally been revealed and justice had been served. But the damage had been done. My life had been shattered, my trust had been betrayed, and my heart had been broken. I was left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild my life, and to heal from the wounds that Dasha and Dmitri had inflicted. I moved out of my apartment, unable to bear the memories that haunted the space. I quit my job, unable to face the people who had known me as the naive and gullible fool who had been deceived by a trans woman and her criminal lover. I retreated into myself, isolating myself from the world. But slowly, gradually, I began to heal. I started painting again, pouring my emotions onto the canvas. I reconnected with my friends and family, finding solace and support in their love and understanding. I found a new job, a new apartment, and a new sense of purpose. I learned to forgive myself for being so naive, so trusting, so vulnerable. I realized that I couldn't change the past, but I could control the future. I could choose to be happy, to be strong, and to be true to myself. I never saw Dasha again. I didn't visit her in prison, and I didn't write to her. I simply let her go, releasing her from my life and forgiving her for her transgressions. I knew that she would never be able to make amends for what she had done, but I hoped that she would find some measure of peace and redemption in prison. As for Dmitri, I tried to forget him, to erase him from my memory. But he remained a haunting figure, a symbol of the darkness and deception that had consumed my life. I knew that I would never be able to fully escape his influence, but I refused to let him control me. I chose to focus on the future, on the possibilities that lay ahead, and on the love and happiness that I deserved. Years passed, and I rebuilt my life, brick by brick. I found a new love, a new career, and a new sense of self. I learned to trust again, to love again, and to live again. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. I had survived, I had healed, and I had emerged stronger and wiser than before. And then, one day, I received a letter. It was postmarked from a prison in Siberia. The return address was Dasha Volkov. My heart skipped a beat. After all these years, she was reaching out to me. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to open the letter. But curiosity got the better of me. I tore open the envelope and began to read. The letter was long and rambling, filled with apologies, regrets, and confessions. Dasha wrote about her life in prison, her struggles with guilt and remorse, and her newfound faith. She admitted that she had lied to me, manipulated me, and betrayed me. But she insisted that her feelings for me had been real, that she had truly loved me in her own twisted way. She wrote about Dmitri, his charm, his intelligence, and his dark side. She explained that she had been under his spell, blinded by her love for him, and unable to see the damage that they were causing. She confessed that she had known about his crimes, that she had helped him cover them up, and that she had been complicit in his evil deeds. She begged for my forgiveness, knowing that she didn't deserve it. She asked me to find it in my heart to forgive her, not for her sake, but for my own. She ended the letter with a plea, a desperate request that I visit her in prison. She wanted to see me one last time, to apologize in person, and to ask for my forgiveness. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Should I visit Dasha? Should I forgive her? Should I give her the closure that she so desperately sought? I didn't know what to do. I decided to seek advice from Madame Olga, my former calligraphy instructor. She had always been a source of wisdom and guidance, and I trusted her to help me make the right decision. I found Madame Olga in her studio, surrounded by her calligraphy tools and her calming presence. I told her about the letter from Dasha, her plea for forgiveness, and my uncertainty about what to do. Madame Olga listened patiently, her eyes filled with compassion. When I finished, she took my hand and said, "Anya, my dear, forgiveness is not about condoning the actions of others. It is about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It is about choosing peace over conflict." She smiled gently and said, "Whether you choose to visit Dasha or not, the most important thing is that you forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for being deceived, for being hurt, and for being angry. Forgive yourself for the mistakes you have made along the way." Her words resonated with me. I realized that she was right. I had been holding on to so much anger and resentment for so long, and it was finally time to let it go. I decided to visit Dasha in prison. not because I felt obligated to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to see her one last time, to offer her my forgiveness, and to finally close the book on that chapter of my life. I traveled to Siberia, to the remote prison where Dasha was being held. The prison was a bleak and desolate place, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. The air was cold and harsh, and the atmosphere was heavy with despair. I was led to a small visiting room where I waited for Dasha to arrive. After what seemed like an eternity, she entered the room, her face pale and gaunt. She was wearing a prison uniform and her hair was cut short. She looked like a shadow of her former self. We sat down at a table across from each other, separated by a thick pane of glass. We spoke through a telephone, our voices distorted and echoey. Dasha began to cry as soon as she saw me. "Anya," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I've ruined your life. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked at her, my heart filled with a mixture of pity and compassion. "Dasha," I said, my voice soft. I forgive you for everything." Her eyes widened in surprise, and she sobbed even harder. "Thank you, Anya," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. You don't know how much that means to me." We talked for a long time about the past, the present, and the future. Dasha told me about her struggles in prison, her newfound faith, and her desire to make amends for her crimes. I told her about my life, my healing process, and my hope for the future. As we spoke, I realized that Dasha had changed. She was no longer the manipulative liar that I had known before. She had found redemption in prison, and she was genuinely sorry for the pain that she had caused. Before I left, I took Dasha's hand and said, "I wish you all the best, Dasha. I hope that you find peace and happiness in your life." She smiled sadly and said, "Thank you, Anya, you too." I turned and walked away, leaving Dasha behind. As I walked out of the prison, I felt a sense of peace and closure wash over me. I had finally forgiven Dasha, and I had finally forgiven myself. The nightmare was over. I was free. As I left the prison behind, I felt lighter than I had in years. Forgiving Dasha had been like lifting a tremendous weight off my shoulders. I finally understood that forgiveness wasn't about condoning her actions, but about releasing myself from the grip of anger and resentment. I could now move forward without being chained to the past. I returned to Moscow and slowly began to rebuild my life. I reconnected with old friends, pursued my artistic passions, and opened myself to new experiences. The scars from the past remained, but they were a reminder of my resilience, not a source of pain. One day, while visiting a local art gallery, I met a kind and intriguing man named Maxim. He was a writer with a passion for exploring the human condition, and we quickly bonded over our shared love of art and literature. As our relationship deepened, I found myself opening up to him about my past, sharing the story of Dasha and Dmitri. He listened with empathy and understanding, never judging me for my naivete or vulnerability. Maxim helped me see that the experience, though painful, had ultimately made me stronger and more compassionate. He encouraged me to embrace my past, not to bury it, and to use it as a source of inspiration for my art. With Maxim's support, I began to create a series of paintings that explored the themes of deception, forgiveness, and redemption. The paintings were raw and emotional, reflecting the turmoil and healing that I had experienced. To my surprise, the paintings were well received, and I began to gain recognition as an artist. My work resonated with others who had experienced betrayal and loss, offering them a message of hope and healing. I realized that my pain had a purpose, that it could be transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. Years passed, and I continued to create art, to love, and to live life to the fullest. I never forgot Dasha and Dmitri, but I no longer allowed them to define me. They were simply a part of my story, a chapter in a long and complex narrative. One afternoon, I received a letter from a lawyer representing Dasha. She had been released from prison and was seeking to make amends for her past actions. She had inherited a small sum of money and wanted to donate it to a charity that supported victims of fraud and deception. She asked if I would be willing to help her choose the right charity. I hesitated. Was this another manipulation? Was Dasha trying to worm her way back into my life? I decided to consult with Maxim. He encouraged me to give Dasha the benefit of the doubt, to believe that she was genuinely trying to do good. With Maxim's support, I agreed to meet with Dasha's lawyer and help her choose a charity. The meeting was brief and uneventful. Dasha's lawyer was a kind and compassionate woman who seemed genuinely committed to helping her client make amends. We discussed various charities and ultimately chose one that provided counseling and support to victims of fraud and deception. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of closure. Dasha had finally taken responsibility for her actions, and she was trying to make a positive impact on the world. I didn't need to forgive her again, but I could appreciate her efforts to atone for her past. I walked through the streets of Moscow, feeling grateful for the life I had built, for the love I had found, and for the peace I had achieved. The story of Dasha and Dmitri was a dark chapter in my past, but it was also a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my capacity for forgiveness. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that I could face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage, compassion, and a heart full of hope. Yet, a nagging feeling persisted. Had I truly uncovered all the layers of deceit? Was it possible that there were still secrets lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed? Only time would tell. As the weeks turned into months, a subtle unease settled over me, a feeling that I couldn't quite shake. It wasn't a specific event or a single interaction, but rather a collection of small inconsistencies, whispers of doubt that echoed in the back of my mind. My life with Maxim was comfortable, filled with shared passions and quiet joys, but something felt off. It was as if a faint melody from a forgotten song was playing just out of reach, teasing me with a sense of familiarity that I couldn't place. Maxim was supportive, loving, and seemingly open, yet there were moments when his eyes would cloud over, when he would deflect questions with a practiced ease that felt rehearsed. He was a writer, after all, a master of words, and I couldn't help but wonder if his life was as carefully constructed as his stories. I tried to dismiss my fears as remnants of my past trauma, echoes of Dasha and Dmitri's deception. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my insecurities onto an innocent man. But the feeling persisted, a nagging suspicion that refused to be silenced. One evening, as Maxim was working late at his computer, I noticed a small, antique box tucked away on a shelf in his study. It was intricately carved with Cyrillic letters, and it seemed strangely familiar. I asked Maxim about it, and he brushed it off as a family heirloom, a gift from his grandmother. But something in his tone, a subtle hesitation, made me question his answer. Later that night, after Maxim had gone to bed, I crept back into his study and examined the box more closely. I carefully opened it, my heart pounding with anticipation. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs, letters, and documents. As I sifted through them, I recognized a familiar face, a face that sent a chill down my spine. It was Dmitri, but the photographs weren't recent. They were old, dating back years, and in them, Dmitri looked younger, healthier, and different. He was smiling, laughing, and full of life. And in several of the photographs, he was standing next to Maxim, his arm around his shoulder, their faces pressed together in affectionate smiles. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Maxim knew Dmitri. But how? And why had he never mentioned it? As I delved deeper into the box, I found a series of letters written in Cyrillic script. I couldn't read them, but I recognized the handwriting. It was Dasha's. The letters were addressed to Maxim, and they were filled with confessions, apologies, and pleas for forgiveness. It became increasingly clear that Maxim was somehow connected to Dasha and Dmitri, that he was a part of their twisted web of deceit. But what was his role? Was he a victim, like me? Or was he a perpetrator, a co-conspirator in their crimes? As I pieced together the evidence, a horrifying truth began to emerge. Maxim wasn't just a writer. He was something else, something darker, something far more sinister. And I was once again caught in a web of lies, a web that threatened to consume me whole. I confronted Maxim the next morning, armed with the photographs, the letters, and my newfound knowledge. He initially denied everything, dismissing the evidence as coincidence, misinterpretation, and outright fabrication. But as I pressed him, as I confronted him with the inconsistencies in his story, his facade began to crumble. His eyes darted around the room, his hands trembled, and his voice cracked with anxiety. Finally, he broke down, confessing his connection to Dasha and Dmitri. He revealed that he had been friends with Dmitri since childhood, that they had grown up together in the same village, sharing a bond that was as close as brotherhood. He had known about Dmitri's criminal activities, but he had turned a blind eye, blinded by his loyalty to his friend. He had even helped Dmitri cover up his crimes, using his writing skills to create false alibis and manipulate the media. When Dmitri was arrested, Maxim had vowed to avenge him, to expose the people who had brought him down. He had targeted me, seeing me as the key to unlocking the truth about Dash's involvement. He had seduced me, gained my trust, and manipulated me into revealing my deepest secrets. He had planned to write a book about our relationship, exposing Dash's lies and portraying Dmitri as a victim of circumstance. But as he got to know me, as he fell in love with me, his plans began to change. He realized that I was innocent, that I had been as much a victim as he was. He couldn't bring himself to hurt me, to expose my pain to the world. He had tried to break things off, to distance himself from me, but he couldn't resist the pull that drew us together. He had been torn between his loyalty to Dmitri and his love for me, trapped in a conflict that threatened to destroy him. As Maxim spoke, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a strange sense of understanding. I realized that he was as much a victim of Dmitri's manipulation as I was. He had been caught in a web of lies, forced to choose between loyalty and love. But that didn't excuse his actions. He had still lied to me, manipulated me, and betrayed my trust. He had used me for his own purposes, and he had put my life in danger. I told him that I couldn't forgive him, that I needed time to process everything. I walked out of his apartment, leaving him standing there, his face etched with regret and despair. As I walked, I knew that I had to make a choice. I could either succumb to the darkness, allowing the pain of the past to consume me, or I could rise above it, choosing forgiveness and healing. But could I truly forgive Maxim after everything he had done? And what about Dmitri? Was he truly the mastermind behind all of this? Or was there still more to the story? I sought solace in the familiar comfort of Madame Olga's calligraphy studio. The scent of ink and paper, the gentle strokes of the brush, the quiet wisdom of my instructor, all helped to calm my racing mind. I poured out my heart to Madame Olga, sharing the latest revelations about Maxim and Dmitri. She listened patiently, her eyes filled with compassion. When I finished, she said, "Anya, my dear, the path to healing is never straight. It is filled with twists and turns, with moments of clarity and moments of confusion. You have uncovered many truths, but there may still be more to discover. Trust your intuition, follow your heart, and never give up on your search for peace." I asked her what she thought I should do about Maxim. Should I forgive him? Should I expose him? Should I simply walk away and try to forget everything? Madame Olga smiled gently and said, "That is a decision that only you can make. But I will tell you this. Forgiveness is not about condoning the actions of others. It is about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It is about choosing compassion over judgment." She suggested that I confront Maxim again, to ask him all the questions that I still had, and to listen to his answers with an open mind. She also warned me to be prepared for the possibility that he might still be hiding something. The truth, she said, is often buried beneath layers of deception, and it takes courage and perseverance to uncover it. With Madame Olga's advice in mind, I decided to confront Maxim one last time. I arranged to meet him at a park near his apartment, a neutral location where we could speak freely and honestly. I arrived early, my heart pounding with anticipation and a sense of resolve. I watched as Maxim approached, his face etched with anxiety and a hint of hope. He sat down on the bench beside me, his eyes avoiding mine. "Thank you for meeting me, Anya," he said, his voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve it." I took a deep breath and said, "Maxim, I need you to be completely honest with me. I need you to tell me everything, no matter how painful it may be. Is there anything else you're hiding? Anything else I need to know?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Anya, there is something else, something that I've been afraid to tell you." He revealed that Dmitri hadn't just been a criminal, he had been a sociopath. He had been incapable of empathy, remorse, or genuine connection. He had used and manipulated everyone in his life, including Dasha and Maxim. Dasha had been infatuated with Dmitri since childhood, blinded by his charm and charisma. She had been willing to do anything for him, even commit crimes. Maxim had been drawn to Dmitri's intelligence and ambition, but he had also been intimidated by his power and control. He had allowed Dmitri to manipulate him, to use him, and to drag him into his twisted world. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Maxim revealed that Dmitri wasn't just a criminal, he was a killer. He had not only ordered the murder of a rival gang member, but he had also killed his own parents. He had inherited a large sum of money from them, which he had used to finance his criminal activities. Dasha had known about the murders, but she had kept it a secret, protecting Dmitri at all costs. Maxim had only learned about the murders recently, after finding a hidden diary in Dimitri's apartment. He had been horrified by the truth, but he had been too afraid to expose Dimitri. He had been afraid that Dimitri would come after him, that he would kill him too. As Maxim spoke, I felt a wave of revulsion and disbelief wash over me. Dimitri was even more monstrous than I had imagined. He was a cold-blooded killer, a sociopath who had destroyed the lives of everyone around him. And Dasha had been his willing accomplice, protecting him, enabling him, and perpetuating his evil. I realized that I had to do something. I couldn't let Dimitri get away with his crimes. I had to bring him to justice, no matter the cost. I knew that exposing Dimitri would be dangerous. He was a powerful and ruthless man, and he would stop at nothing to protect himself. But I couldn't let fear control me. I had to do what was right, not just for myself, but for the countless victims whose lives had been shattered by Dimitri's actions. I decided to go to the authorities, to present them with the evidence that I had gathered, and to expose Dimitri's crimes to the world. I knew that it wouldn't be easy. I would have to face skepticism, resistance, and possibly even threats. But I was determined to see justice done. I contacted Sergei, the former police officer who had helped me investigate Dasha and Dimitri. I told him about Maxim's revelations, about Dimitri's murders, and about my plan to go to the authorities. Sergei was initially hesitant. He warned me about the dangers involved, about the risks of exposing myself to Dimitri's wrath. But he also admired my courage and determination, and he agreed to help me. Sergei used his contacts within the police force to arrange a meeting with a high-ranking detective, a woman named Irina. Irina was known for her integrity, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to justice. I met with Irina and presented her with the evidence that I had gathered. I showed her the photographs, the letters, and the diary that Maxim had found. I told her everything I knew about Dimitri, Dasha, and their criminal activities. Irina listened intently, her eyes narrowing with suspicion and concern. She asked me a series of questions, probing for inconsistencies and testing my credibility. After several hours of questioning, she finally said, "I believe you, Anya. I believe that Dmitry Volkov is a dangerous man, and I believe that he has committed terrible crimes. I will launch a full-scale investigation into his activities, and I will bring him to justice." Irina assembled a team of investigators and began to gather evidence. They interviewed witnesses, examined documents, and conducted surveillance on Dimitri's known associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover a mountain of evidence linking Dimitri to a wide range of criminal activities, including fraud, extortion, murder, and drug trafficking. They also discovered evidence that Dasha had been complicit in Dimitri's crimes, helping him to cover them up and protect him from the authorities. With the evidence in hand, Irina obtained a warrant for Dimitri's arrest. A team of armed officers raided his hideout and apprehended him without incident. Dimitri didn't resist, didn't deny his crimes, and didn't show any remorse for his actions. He simply smiled and said, "You can't prove anything." But he was wrong. The police had gathered irrefutable evidence of his guilt, and he was quickly charged with a long list of crimes. Dasha was also arrested and charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. She pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Dimitri was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Justice had finally been served. The nightmare was over. The trial of Dmitry Volkov was a media sensation. The story of his crimes, his deceptions, and his forbidden love captivated the world. The details of his murders, his fraud, and his manipulation were splashed across newspapers and broadcast on television screens. I was called to testify at the trial, to share my story, and to expose Dimitri's evil. It was a difficult and emotional experience, but I knew that it was necessary. I had to speak the truth, to give voice to the victims who had been silenced by Dimitri's cruelty. As I testified, I felt a sense of power and purpose. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor. I had overcome the darkness, and I was now shining a light on the truth. After the trial, I received an outpouring of support from around the world. People wrote letters, sent emails, and posted messages on social media, thanking me for my courage and sharing their own stories of survival. I realized that my experience had resonated with others, that it had given them hope and inspiration. I decided to use my platform to advocate for victims of crime, to raise awareness about domestic violence, and to promote healing and forgiveness. I created a foundation to support these causes, and I dedicated my life to making a positive impact on the world. I continued to paint, using my art to express my emotions and to inspire others. My paintings became more vibrant, more hopeful, and more powerful. They told stories of resilience, of healing, and of the triumph of good over evil. I found love again, with a kind and compassionate man who cherished me for who I was. We built a life together, filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. I finally found the peace and happiness that I had longed for, the sense of belonging and security that had been stolen from me so long ago. I never forgot Dasha and Dmitri, but I no longer allowed them to control my life. They were simply a part of my past, a reminder of the lessons I had learned and the person I had become. Years later, I received another letter from Dasha. She had been released from prison and was living a quiet life in a small village in Siberia. She had found peace and contentment in her solitude, and she had dedicated her life to helping others. She wrote that she was grateful for my forgiveness and that she was praying for my happiness. I smiled as I read the letter, feeling a sense of closure and compassion. Dasha had found her own path to redemption, and I was happy for her. I never saw Dasha or Dmitri again, but their story remained a part of my life, a reminder of the darkness that exists in the world and the power of love and forgiveness to overcome it. But as I settled into my new normal, a seed of doubt began to sprout. What if Maxim had been even more deeply involved than he let on? What if he had been the real puppet master, pulling the strings while Dmitri danced to his tune? The thought gnawed at me, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. Maxim had confessed to helping Dmitri, but had he truly revealed the full extent of his involvement? Had he been protecting himself, minimizing his role in Dmitri's crimes? I replayed our conversations in my mind, searching for clues, for inconsistencies, for anything that might suggest that he was still hiding something. I remembered the antique box in his study, the photographs, the letters, and the diary. Had I examined them closely enough? Had I missed something important? I decided to revisit Maxim's apartment, to search for any remaining evidence to uncover the truth, once and for all. I knew it was a risk. Maxim could still be dangerous, and he could be waiting for me. But I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. I contacted Sergei, my former police officer friend, and asked him to accompany me to Maxim's apartment. Sergei was hesitant, but he agreed to help me, knowing how much this meant to me. We arrived at Maxim's apartment late at night, when the building was quiet and the streets were deserted. Sergei used his skills to pick the lock, and we slipped inside. The apartment was dark and empty, just as I remembered it. The furniture was covered in dust, and the air was stale and musty. It was as if time had stood still since I had last been there. I began to search the apartment, methodically examining every room, every drawer, and every shelf. Sergei helped me, his trained eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. We found nothing of significance in the living room, the bedroom, or the kitchen. But when we entered Maxim's study, I felt a familiar tingle of anticipation. This was where I had found the antique box, the photographs, and the letters. This was where the truth had begun to unravel. I started to search the study, examining every book, every file, and every document. Sergei checked the walls, the floors, and the ceiling, looking for hidden compartments or secret passages. After several hours of searching, we were about to give up when Sergei called out to me. "Anya, I think I found something." He was standing in front of the fireplace, examining the wall behind it. He had discovered a small, almost imperceptible crack in the plaster. He carefully pried away a section of the wall, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment, we found a metal box. Sergei opened the box and we peered inside. It was filled with cash, jewelry, and documents. The cash was in euros and US dollars, a significant amount of money. The jewelry was expensive and ornate, clearly stolen from someone. But it was the documents that caught my attention. They were bank statements, contracts, and letters, all bearing Dmitri's name. As I examined the documents, I realized that they were proof of Dmitri's criminal activities. They were evidence of his fraud, his extortion, and his murders. But there was something else, something even more shocking. The documents revealed that Maxim had been the mastermind behind Dmitri's crimes. He had been the one pulling the strings, the one orchestrating the schemes, and the one profiting from the suffering of others. Dmitri had been his puppet, a pawn in his twisted game. Maxim had used Dmitri's charm and charisma to lure victims, to manipulate investors, and to intimidate rivals. He had used Dmitri's criminal connections to carry out his dirty work, to silence his enemies, and to protect his own interests. And he had used Dasha's love for Dmitri to control her, to manipulate her, and to make her complicit in his crimes. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Maxim wasn't just a friend of Dmitri, he was his partner in crime, his mentor, and his puppet master. He had been the one driving force behind all the evil, the one responsible for all the pain and suffering. And he had used me, manipulated me, and betrayed me in the most insidious way possible. I felt a surge of rage, a burning desire for revenge. I had been a fool to trust Maxim, to believe his lies, and to open my heart to him. He had taken advantage of my vulnerability, and he had used me for his own twisted purposes. But I wouldn't let him get away with it. I would expose him just as I had exposed Dasha and Dmitri. I would bring him to justice, no matter the cost. I contacted Irina, the detective who had investigated Dmitri. I told her about the hidden compartment, the metal box, and the documents that we had found. I explained that Maxim had been the mastermind behind Dmitri's crimes, that he had been the one pulling the strings all along. Irina was shocked by the revelation, but she didn't doubt my